So welcome everyone, and thank you so much for attending Thrive 360 right off the start, but also for joining our session today. My name is Dr. Louise Lambert. And I'll introduce myself in a second, but we also have two other special guests today, Dr. Melanie Schlatter and Dr. Sonakshi Ruhela with us for what I hope will be an interesting conversation around, I don't want to say pandemic coping, but maybe post-pandemic coping, because we know that the end is almost in sight. My name is Dr. Louise Lambert, and I am a researcher in positive psychology. I'm also an author. I'm also a professor at university, and I also do consulting in schools, in organizations around positive psychology and using that science to increase happiness in people's lives generally. And I'll be moderating this panel. And I'd like to maybe start us off with introducing Dr. Melanie Schlatter. If we could have her make her appearance. Hello, Dr. Melanie, how are you?
Hi, Dr. Louise. Good. Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thank you so much. So just a quick note on Dr. Melanie. She is a clinical health psychologist and currently does clinical work with patients, so more of a medical context, and works at the Well Women Clinic and also at the American Hospital in Dubai. And her area of specialization is health and cancer. So thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
And we are also joined by Dr. Sonakshi Ruhela. Hi, how are you?
Very well, doctor. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. It's been a while since we've talked in person. Yeah. So Dr. Sonakshi is currently an associate registrar at the Amity University in Dubai. She was formerly the program director of psychology and behavioral sciences at the university itself. She does teaching, research, and her area, or her context, if you will, is young people in universities, millenniums specifically. So thank you for joining us also.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Great. So as I said, we're going to, mix this up a little bit and sort of have a three-way conversation, because we've all been attending many Zoom conferences over this past year, and we've had many experts sort of give us their thoughts and ideas, and certainly we will do some of that. But we also want to show you that we're human as well, and we may share a little bit of our own stories or a little bit tidbits of advice, and essentially, frame our context not only in pandemic, but thinking of what is next, what is coming beyond. So thinking also a little bit post-pandemic. And the other thing is also to offer you a number of different views. So given that we're all in psychology, psychologists are sometimes a little bit guilty of promoting the dominant view of whether it's depression or anxiety, coping, what have you. And today I've already asked our speakers to sort of bring in perhaps alternative views to challenge a little bit of that dominant narrative. And there's a little bit of method to that madness. One, it just kind of shakes things up, and we don't want to give you the same information that maybe you've been hearing for the past year. But also, I think there's value, and psychology does a disservice when we only show one particular model or one particular way of understanding or conceptualizing, whether that's depression, anxiety, or whatever it may be. And often the key to feeling better is to find our way in those conceptualizations and find the words that matter and to fit the most for us. So that's kind of why we're taking this approach. So my first question to start us off, and I'll start by answering it because of course I'm the moderator, is to ask our speakers to think of 3 words that they could use to describe their experience of the pandemic. And as they're quickly scribbling these down or thinking of them, I can certainly share mine. And I think for me, the early on stage was definitely anxiety. I was absorbing this collective panic and freak out that the world was experiencing. And yeah, my anxiety and catastrophizing was definitely off the charts. My second word is optimism. I also realized that, wow, this is really the time for psychology and well-being, for us to be heard and for us to be taken seriously. If there was ever a time in history where people are thinking about, how do I live a better life? How do I feel better? What are the ingredients to a worthwhile life? This is it. And my most current word is, I think, a sense of renewed purpose, that yes, indeed, happiness matters, well-being matters, and what we have to say in this respect matters. So those are my three. Dr. Melanie, would you like to give us your 3 words?
Gosh, right off the bat. I think, I was thrown into homeschooling. So I kind of had this kind of clinical practice, and I was used to getting my son from school at sort of like 3 o'clock, and life was all kind of organized and structured. And then suddenly it was like, hey, you've got to fit in a whole school day into your entire clinical practice, and you're going to do it all from your home. And I was just exhausted, is probably the word. I was just like, oh my gosh. I definitely learned I wasn't cut out to be a teacher. So it was also, I suppose, my second word, really, really challenging. And I think over the months, I think we've been so lucky in Dubai that gradually we haven't had to do the homeschooling as much anymore, and the kids are sort of back in a routine, and I've kind of got my space back and I'm getting my rhythm back, and also reading so much about the virus and the pandemic and people's reactions to it. I've actually had more time to actually reflect on what's happening across the world. And as you say, from a psychological standpoint as well, why are some people reacting this way? Why are others acting in another way? So for that, I'd say also interesting, very, very interesting in terms of, how we can research it and looking at literally human behavior.
Fantastic. All right. Dr. Sonakshi, what would your 3 words be?
I feel the same as Dr. Melanie was feeling. However, I think the first thing that happened to me was, I relate to you, Dr. Louise, was a sense of anxiety. However, over a period of time, so I didn't, personal sharing is very important. I didn't realize that, I would have a lockdown anxiety or a quarantine anxiety so much. But my quarantine anxiety became quintessential anxiety. It was something that was bound to be, and you couldn't do anything about it. So my sense of acceptance came gradually. So anxiety definitely was one of the things. The second keyword that I would think was I automatically social support, family came into picture a lot. And I stay alone here in UAE for the last, I think, so many years. And, I started to feel that if I need to fall back upon, who are the people I will be falling back upon? And family came quite handy, which I really think is very important. So that is the second word. And the third word is, I found myself having a lot of time for myself, which was, I thought would be anxious because I've never put the brakes to my work and life in general. So having those breaks was something that was, I was a little hesitant about, but actually I fared really well. And I kind of really enjoyed my time and picked up on a couple of things that I had left for the longest time. So the me time, curbing on the social media intake, my reading became a definite type, like you said, there was a renewed purpose. Even so I picked up books like these,
Oh, wow. not light reading.
over these, so the choices became different, from going to how to maintain a work-life balance to actually going, what's the meaning of life? So yeah, it's a good thing. It's a lockdown and this pandemic actually had a lot of hope and optimism for sure.
Okay, fantastic. And I love these responses, and it really just shows the range. Some people have, learnt yoga, Italian, started to play the violin. That has certainly not been me. And then other people have struggled a lot for various reasons. I think parents in particular have had a really hard time, as you say, Dr. Melanie, squishing everything into 8 hours, which is just not possible, and really wishing and hoping for the end of this to come definitely more quickly than later. So I'm curious, because of this experience has been such a mixed bag for people, I think the topic for us to talk about today was depression, but I like to call it maybe more of just a collective yuck. Because it's not necessarily depression for everybody. Some people it's more anxiety, some people it's more about, oh, what is my purpose in life, and these bigger questions of meaning and so on. So I'm curious, just from and this may reflect your own theoretical orientation or how you work, or even your own personal framework or theory or philosophy of life. How do you understand what is going on collectively, and how does that relate to maybe some of your patient experience or young students experiences? I'm just wondering what's the overlap there. Dr. Melanie, would you like to start us off?
Yes, no problem. Thinking of obviously depression, it's a horrible, horrible mood disorder when you think about it. And as you say, it's not lumped under all of sort of one umbrella. There are many, many forms of depression, and there are people who are quite functional going through their lives. The depression, as we would say, is sort of quite mild, but there are, of course, very, very severe forms too. And from the clinical definition, we know, obviously, as you say, that kind of collective yuck, there's a feeling of sadness, there's a loss of interest, there's a lack of pleasure and energy, which stops a person from doing their normal activities. So, with depression, we know there's not really an impetus to do anything. Those good feelings, that oomph, it's just not there. And so for me, clinically, I see people a lot of the time anyway, forget COVID even, who have reached a point where they're just emotionally flatlined. They'll often say, what's the point of trying? What's the point of living? Why bother? So you can see there are almost like themes of nihilism, the belief that all values are baseless and nothing can be done about a situation. So there are even elements of pessimism there. And so if I think about, a lot of the cancer patients that I work with, if they've been going through months and months and months of treatments and that, they will often ask these questions because they're tired, they're exhausted, they don't know the point. They kind of know they've got to do treatments to get better, but after it being so taxing for so long, it really wears thin on them. And the same thing with people obviously going through the pandemic. We're seeing the same kind of I'll say sort of attitudes and thoughts coming through. People are tired, they can't be, they can't almost be bothered anymore. And I think for me, predominantly, what I sort of see across the board is like a lack of meaning. People don't know sort of why they're doing what they're doing anymore. It's Groundhog Day. Tons of people have been saying, gosh, I'm kind of looking at my job here. Is this really what I've been doing for the last 5 years? Like what trajectory have I been on? And people often don't have like a strong enough value system. Maybe they've forgotten what they stand for. They don't believe in themselves anymore. So they're less likely to be inspired and motivated. And again, that theme that nothing feels that important enough anymore. And people can tell you logically as well, hey, my studies are kind of going okay, and I'm in a nice house and I'm safe, and maybe I've got a flash car, and I've got, the kids are pretty nice and whatever. So people can rationally and logically, tell you that they feel happy. They can tell you they should sort of feel grateful, maybe that family is important to them, and I think they want to, but yet the fundamental meaning of why it's important or relevant to them is just not there, again, so they're just not feeling it. So a lot for me, when I talk to people, regardless of what they've been through, but of course, especially with the pandemic, is that meaning. People are really looking at their lives and sort of saying, what's going on here?
I love this view because, often I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, we focused a lot on coping. We're telling people, make sure you get your sleep, make sure you do exercise, make sure you eat well. And that kind of flew out the window about halfway through somewhere. And I think we've moved past that almost. And now we're really in why it's these bigger questions of meaning that have really been pushed to the forefront. Dr. Sonakshi, what are your thoughts on this idea of meaning and, get this Groundhog Day that we keep repeating?
Actually, I'm a counseling psychologist. My perspective As I see, the kind of depression that was creeping in the society was a very gradual process, as we say, from helplessness to worthlessness to how they sometimes feel hopelessness. And obviously differences in the situations of people and how, what stage came at what phase. Yes, helplessness was primarily, as you asked, the framework, in general. Helplessness was very strong as a segment in people. And I think it came with the idea that this was the first time they came face to face with their limitations. The possibilities for them were very restricted. There were families who were put together, in one house. This is what I see majorly. For example, most of the students were very depressed because they didn't know how to stay with their parents in one house. And there was a lot of, questions of tolerance. There was a lot of questions of generic unhappiness, because of the situation. So we realized that, specifically in my situation at the university level, we realized that a lot of students were suffering because they didn't realize or they didn't know how to deal with the situation of, primarily going back to their nest and belonging to there. So they had a very I would say a hard time believing that now they are homebound.
Yeah. So sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. So that's something that came very, predominantly. Another thing that I think surfaced quite a lot is how some people found themselves in this so-called irresolvable conflict, the conflict of a dichotomous situation where, like a point of time, I will tell you, Dr. Louise and Dr. Melanie, me with a sense of understanding about myself and professionally, having a sort of an edge to understand my own dynamics. There were times that I found the situation so dichotomous because I understand that there is someone to speak to me or to be with me, but physically there is no presence. So, the warmth and the connect that people were expecting or I was expecting, it wasn't reaching. So, like you said, the start of things were basically going into a lot of helplessness because you don't know about the situation, then eventually losing jobs or having these family situations back and forth, and you start to become, get into the mode of worthless and hopelessness. I think I saw it a lot. I also read somewhere that, places like Sharjah have observed over 400 cases of domestic abuse in 90 days. So these situations started to come forward. A lot of these started to come forward in the university students as well. So the need for counseling escalated suddenly a lot. And that's when you realize all these things. Sorry, Dr. Louise.
Yeah, no. And I really appreciate you saying that. I had not heard of that, but these are things we don't think about because of course they're happening in the home. These are this type of data that stays quite silent and hidden and a little bit secret, if you will. But you really raise an interesting point, and that is context. That, we think of, well, these super rich people who are quarantining on yachts. Great. We don't feel sorry for them. And then there's, the single people who are quarantining and, relying a lot on Netflix and video calls. And then families, we just sort of go, okay, well, they'll just manage, they'll figure it out. But this is really where a lot of the high stress situations are in, especially if you're living with a lot of people. But, your setting in which you found yourself really made the difference between good quarantine, if there's such a thing, or a worse one. So, and this really flies in the face of a lot of psychology. We tend to put the responsibility of change on the individual, and that somehow they can just rise up around their context, but really context sometimes outweighs what the individual can do, can cope with, and can even understand. So I love that you brought that up. For me, I've been researching lately, looking at this phenomenon called the third quarter. I didn't even know it existed. And I started looking this up because I started feeling worse a couple of weeks ago. And I thought, this doesn't make sense. I'm supposed to be feeling better. The end is coming. And it turns out it's a real thing. It's called the third quarter phenomenon. So I'm saying this in the event that people are feeling the same way. And essentially it's what happens, if you think about you're running a marathon, there's 42 kilometers, the first 35, I don't want to say are easy, but relatively easy. The last 7 are brutal. They're worse than all the other ones put together. And that's kind of where we're at. We're at that 35-kilometer mark. We can see the end, but it's still too far away to get excited. And it's almost hurts more to get excited about because we still have a long way to go. But it also speaks to this idea of the human brain is not designed to be bored. The human brain is not designed to have monotonous predictability day in and day out. I mean, this is why the seasons change. So I think for a lot of people, it's the last little grind is becoming even harder to cope with. So on that note, I'm curious, what are some things that you have done during this time to, thinking of your own understandings of this collective yuck, whatever that may be? What have you sort of focused on doing in terms of strategies or practices or changes in your life to help yourself? And yeah, let's start with that. Let's start with Dr. Sonakshi this time. Sorry, I know you're writing notes. Maybe I'm pushing you a little quicker. Go ahead.
No, I'm quite intrigued. I'll read about the third quarter phenomenon, Dr. Louise. Thank you so much for adding to my knowledge.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was new to me as well.
But this is a very interesting question, and I saw myself going through lots of phases. So because you're asking for a personal, and I think personal stories and self-disclosures help better, I found myself in a situation where the best strategy that worked for me was a sense of what is my mental state, and then accepting that this is my mental state. And so I have a very, I think most people will relate to me. My sense of stress and the compensation and the relief is in unhealthy eating patterns. So I'm a multitasker, so I will not take one thing at a time. I will take 10 things at a time. And by the time those things will come down to becoming one, my, food list and Zomato bills go high. So this pattern was a very crucial pattern that I know about myself for a very long time now. Lockdown, this need to be rectified, because obviously these things, they started to come to me one by one or bit by bit, as they say. Okay, this is the challenge. Take care of this. Academic teaching is important. How do you? So these things started to come one by one. So I had a lot of time to myself. I think I always speak, and we always theoretically had a bigger understanding of mindfulness than actually in practice. Personally. And so I started to segment my, days in a way that I understood that these are points where I needed to be more mindful of, or I need to do some sort of, stress management, some sort of 15 minutes meditation. That started. And it still continues. So thankfully, I'm doing very well with that, because sustainability of a strategy is equally important. Mm-hmm. And number two, what happened was, there are multiple opportunities at work that you have a high sense of validation. Your work gets approved, you're doing good, your children are happy, your feedback is good. So your sense of validation is very high. But what do you do when the sense of validation is only and solely dependent on your own view of yourself? Mm. So that was a very interesting shift for me as a personal observation, because I started to realize that I'm married to my work. And because I'm so married to my work, that if I need to draw to things to myself, how would that transition be? So to be really honest with you, a lot of reading was required, a lot of talking to people, experts. I have a touch wood, one thing that I really invested and I'm blessed with is an excellent social support system. Whether it is in terms of my personal networks or professional networks, sometimes you need to become a kid who actually goes collecting their slam book entries. And I think I did that a lot. So I went back to people asking, have I missed on some time from you? What are the things that I could possibly work with? And that worked brilliantly for me, because it just brought my sense of, reality and idealism at one puck. It just gave me, you think you are being a very good friend to this person, but the other person feels you are missing a lot of parties and you're missing a lot of gatherings because you're So the constant feedback that I got was a very good feedback, harsh also. So it's not easy to take a feedback. Sometimes feedback comes as, oh, you missed my child's birthday, this one, because you were doing something for Amity. So I'm like, oh, but do you remember? Your child is already 10 years old. I did come at the second birthday party. You still remember it? So, these things people really keep close to themselves. And it was an eye-opener for me to see that all the good you do sometimes just boils down to you didn't attend that party.
Yeah.
So those feedbacks and taking those feedbacks, Dr. Louise, was a very, very difficult and challenging thing. But you have to strive to know exactly how much can you spend yourself in that feedback as well.
Yeah.
So for me, I think three things worked very well for me. I took a lot of feedback from people who are close to me. I understood, very clearly. I have, this is a very important social support system, so I need to understand them and understand what am I not doing. Number two, like I mentioned, I practiced a lot of mindfulness. Number three, I often found myself in a situation where mental exercise I can do as much as you want, but physical, I would be like, no, that's not happening. So I found myself a buddy because I needed that push. So I found myself a buddy. I thought who was very interested in existentialism as much as I am. But, he's from an English literature background and I'm from a psychology background. So that lies in, it was more like an intellectual, and learning and discourse while you do walking. So I clubbed the two together because if I didn't get that stimulation, I would give up on physical exercise very quickly. So I found these little mechanisms and strategies that worked personally for me very well.
I love these responses, but more than anything, I really appreciate your authenticity and honesty. And I think, sometimes as psychologists, we sort of position ourselves as, I'm the expert, but really we have the same struggles as everybody else. And we also have to figure out our own stuff as well. So I appreciate that very much. And just to commend the courage it takes to get that feedback from other people, I think, again, is, as you said, sometimes a little bit harsh, but these are things maybe we all need to hear at some point in time. Okay, well, given that you've disclosed, I'll disclose a few of my strategies. I'm a wallower. Sometimes when I feel bad, I could sit in it for hours because it's so much fun, right? So, and although I teach positive psychology and the strategies for happiness, I mean, I'm human as well, and I still experience these negative emotions like everyone else. And so we all should. It's not healthy to not experience these, just for the record. But one of the things I found myself really using a lot is a strategy by Dr. Kristen Neff called self-compassion. I love this strategy because it really, it resonates with me. So her idea is to treat our psychological pain or emotional pain in the same way we would treat our physical pain. So instead of trying to struggle and transform your thoughts into some, magical positive unicorn that is really hard to do, her advice is, no, don't worry about it. Just sit with it. So, if you had a broken leg, you would sit on the couch, put your foot up with a cast and eat ice cream, and you would give yourself permission to feel bad because your leg is broken. And so I found for me, just using a little bit of that self-compassion, accepting that, yep, I feel bad and I'm going to feel bad for the next couple of hours. I'm giving myself permission to feel bad, actually allowed me to get through it a lot more quickly than if I were struggling with myself trying not to. It would just drag on for days and days and days. So I willingly let myself kind of give in to that collective yuck in order to come out the other end. So I use self-compassion quite a bit. I ate a lot of chips as well. Chips are really a good good strategy. All right, I have a few more, but maybe I'll let Dr. Melanie share a few of her strategies with us.
Gosh, I'm thinking about the times that I've kind of reached that stage where it all just feels like it's just too much, and you don't want to see anyone or anything, do you? You just need to be alone. It's just like you need to kick everyone out, or at least I do. I'm extroverted, but I really value my me time too. So I also know that, if I've actually got to that stage, it's probably something to do with what I'm thinking. I'm like hanging on to stuff from the past. I'm dredging up stuff. I'm worrying about things in the future, so mainly for me, I think it's that hanging on to thoughts, in my mind, and really unhelpful thoughts, like you say, and just feeling so drained. And, I'm so glad that you said it's okay to feel a bit gloomy for a while, perfectly normal. And I think we do have to normalize that, because so many people will sort of say to me, oh, so that's okay, and I'm like, yeah, just go to the couch and eat your pizza, or hide in the wardrobe, or, lock yourself in the bathroom and have a bath, kind of thing. It's like, we have to normalize that it's actually okay to have the feelings. And I think people's greatest discomfort is the discomfort of the literal feelings. I don't want those butterflies in my stomach. I don't want that sick feeling. I don't want that anxiety. I don't like these dark thoughts. People are constantly, as you say, sort of putting up this struggle. And so what we know, and you've kind of said this already, is that it's so important just not to let those things filter into what you do and sort of become your daily habit, your daily mode. And so for me personally, the goal is to try and create an emotional distance between myself and my thoughts, so that I'm not so caught up with them. And I'm not talking about engaging in sort of like distraction or denial, or, it's more about working with the thoughts and being flexible and kind of letting them come along for the ride, I think, rather than the other way around, rather than them dominating me. So I always liken it, like to record player, just sort of turning down the volume on all this stuff that comes at you. But obviously to create emotional distance, I mean, you also have to be present. You have to be a little bit in the here and now. Like when I'm eating the pizza on the couch kind of thing, I'm like buried in my pizza. I'm not thinking of anything, I'm not present. So what I do, and this might take sort of literally a minute or two, breathing, take a breath, and a proper breath, not sort of up here, but right down into your stomach, breathe, and check in with my senses, because your brain just loves that. It loves kind of knowing where you are in space, so look around, even if it's the same boring old place, but look around, see if you can spot something that you haven't spotted before, have a stretch, breathe some more, you might like to smell something. I've got like essential oils on the desk and kind of smell them. I've got like a honey throat spray. I've got bits and pieces, just glass of water, like just kind of get the senses going. I get away from technology unless I need to kind of call my survival person. I'll go out into the sun, or like walk on grass, something like that, maybe sometimes heading for people, obviously, if they're around, and washing my face, drinking water, maybe eating something, because a lot of people will sort of say, oh yeah, I haven't eaten this morning. And then it's like, they're wondering kind of why they're anxious. And of course, their blood sugars are all over the place. So drink something, your body produces stress hormones in response to a lack of water and sustenance. And with all of that kind of bunched up together, just those little things, it could be a second that you just breathe or look around, do things, is I check on how I'm talking to myself. And this is already what you've sort of alluded to, checking in, are these thoughts unhelpful? Are they helpful? What's my mind actually telling me? So I'm kind of looking at it rather than from it. And I'm kind of, I take a spirit of like a curiosity or interest, like, what am I believing here? Use that curiosity to give you that space. Is this really true? Am I really a loser, kind of thing? It's like, it's whatever your mind will tell you, kind of thing. And I try to remember what I teach people also is that, what if just for today you started treating yourself like someone you love, someone you care for, someone you want to protect. If you think of all the love that you've had, if you've held a little kitten, or you've cradled a baby, or you've patted a dog, those kind of loving feelings. And what if you started talking to yourself like you talk to your child or a friend, a parent? I always say, what would you say to them if they were struggling? Because so often we're so harsh to ourselves. I always sort of say, at what point did it become acceptable to kind of talk to yourself in a derogatory and a demeaning and an unhelpful way? why is that okay? And it's not, because, you know, we say the body keeps the score. So I think a lot of it is just recognizing, you know, the mind can send us a whole lot of unhelpful stuff from the past, memories, sensations, images, but we actually don't have to listen to it. We don't have to believe it, and we don't even have to fight it. And I think what we kind of find, and what I find for myself, is when I can get a little bit of that distance and that detachment, I can realize, you know what, I can go back and I can actually have control over every decision that I make, everything that I do. And then you can obviously move towards the direction that you do want, because when we're listening to the stuff that comes in, you know, this pandemic and my job and my friends, and I'm alone and I'm sick, and you're blocked, you're totally fused with it. So you go around your day like this, and you're no good to yourself and you're no good to anyone. So it's just gently finding ways to diffuse, and those kind of diffusion strategies, just stopping for a minute and just talking to yourself in a better way, you know, looking at what you're telling yourself and putting it down, carrying on.
I love that. And this idea of this detached curiosity, we often get sucked into emotions, dramas, stories, events, and we just get carried away as though we're on a boat on the rough seas, and really we don't have to go with it, but we can just be like, isn't that interesting? and it's just a little subtle little shift, but wow, the emotional experience is totally different when you're on shore versus when you're on the boat, and we can choose in some cases where we're going to be. So I love this distinction. I also really liked what you said about, you know, these little things, you know, smell. This has been something I've been focusing on more, and I don't know why it just didn't occur to me at the beginning of the pandemic. I was still trying to do my long-term goals, be optimistic, be hopeful. I've given up on all that now. And now I've just sort of changed my focus to small pleasures, little tiny things I can do in any given day. I buy flowers every week just because eating good cheese. I read the newspaper, the weekend edition, every single weekend. I buy colorful socks. I mean, they're really silly things, but if life is not going to help us and punctuate with these highs and lows and variety and textures and essences and smells and so on, we need to find a way to do that on our own behalf. So that was another one of my strategies as well. I'm just mindful of our time, so I'm wondering if we can maybe just sort of jump to our last little section, and then we can make time for questions. And I'd like to just sort of think about, so what is your advice if you could say it in, you know, a 1 or 2 liner to people, something to think about, something to remember, something to do? It could be from the very simple to the deep, meaningful, about, you know, life in general. What would that be? Dr. Sonakshi, would you like to give us your wisdom?
Wisdom.
or just a good phrase.
You know, I personally think that the most important here, and what I have, you know, drawn from this experience, is that you know, self-love is crucial. It's so important, and the real distinction between how much time you spend, you know, with different segments of your life, your personal, professional, social, environmental, temperamental, how much of these 5 different segments of you want to invest in is very important. So clear balance is needed. And secondly, what I've also understood is that how, you know, and I'm sure you're a positive psychology professional, you probably would be able to guide us more on this. But the effect of, you know, goodwill, the effect of gratitude, the effect of being thankful for these little things that we have, and each day encounters and experiences and observations that build us to be today, is so important in life. And I think one of the biggest lessons that I learned is, you know, as a university professor, I was very keen to see that I'm conditioned to teach. And when I understood that I'm conditioned to teach, the value addition starts to be stagnant. So what I understand is that each experience and each learning and self-grooming and self-knowledge is so important, because we're in such a crucial stage. As university professors, we have the responsibility, as teachers, university professors, we have the responsibility of shaping the minds of tomorrow. And if those minds are shaped on a sense of information that has been carried over years, and there has been lesser revisions in it, it just becomes very, I would say it's not a great value addition. So each day I started to do this, that I would get up in the morning and think, how could I add value to my life and to the life of the people that will come in touch with me today? Whether it's my students, whether it's my management, whether it's my family, whether it's someone who needs advice, whether it's my counseling clients, anybody, I just wanted to do some value addition. So, automatically your mind starts to look for solutions. So a solution-focused approach, starts to become something which is your middle lane. So that kind of something is very important. And at the end of the day, what counts is how much you learn and how much you, how much you grow yourself, and how do you keep yourself productive for as long as possible.
I love that. And it's a nice kind of phrase to think about, add value. And it just immediately orients us to doing rather than thinking and stewing, but take action. Love it. Dr. Melanie.
Oh, thank you for that, Dr. Ruhela. There's so much food for thought there. And, you remind me of a quote, and hopefully I'll get it right. Jordan Peterson, he's a Canadian professor of psychology, and love him or hate him, he says some very interesting things. And one of them is, he says the purpose of life is to find a mode of being that's so meaningful that the fact that life is suffering is no longer relevant. And from that, I would say, you can then see why things like rumination, are so dangerous. This constant cycle that people get into, getting stuck on the old narrative, and people end up feeling so helpless. There's no sense of control, and there's that feeling of that kind of time pressure that we've lost time. We're so caught up in our heads that from what I said even before, that meaning's not there, and we're teaching ourselves every day that there's a person or there a thing that's as scary as the lion, which could actually eat us and kill us. Our brain learns like, wow, my boss is a threat, and so your whole body amps up in anticipation just when you walk into the office. But stress is a major immunosuppressant, and chronic stress is obviously the worst. So we have to look at continually how we perceive things. A lot of people get stuck on kind of thinking about what they don't want, and they forget about what they do want. And they're thinking so much about this impending doom and gloom, things that haven't happened. We talk about sort of cognitive distortions and mass generalizations. And so that would be sort of one of my first tips, is to be very, very careful of engaging in that kind of rumination cycle, getting stuck on that. And I suppose it would be remiss of me not to mention the body as a health psychology, because people also kind of forget there's a body around all of these thoughts, this little part of your head that produces so much angst. People are not moving, they're not exercising, they're not eating right. A lot of people are not sort of doing anything apart from working, so they're not using their senses. There's no kind of a healthy alertness. People are on their phones, and I think people are very, very comfortable. They're not using their bodies in a way in which they're designed. They don't like pushing themselves or kind of exerting any kind of energy or feeling any pain. But I think you said right at the beginning, Dr. Louise, we're not supposed to be sedentary creatures of habit, so I would say, challenge yourself, stretch yourself, capitalize on your dopamine and serotonin receptors, learn something that you've been putting off, or just finish something, or, if it's achieving a personal best or sort of pushing yourself, it could be like meditation or yoga, or I'd go so far as to say like lifting weights or doing fasting, or, it's not about turning people into Rambos or, becoming hyperactive, but it's about using, what we have to live better lives. So, everything that makes us have a better quality of life is just not in our head. You know, we have to think about our bodies too, and then the connections there.
And I think you're right that, right now life is the way it is. And generally life will give us these variations, these textures, these challenges, these opportunities. And now there's fewer and fewer. And so we have to try harder to make some of those happen. And, we need to be careful not to sort of burn ourselves up trying, but at the same time, be mindful that we do need to try, because it's very easy to just sit on the couch and a year's gone by, and there will be consequences to that as well. I'll maybe just leave you with mine, and then I think there's one or two questions. My phrase would be big perspectives, small joys. So one of the things that helped me during this pandemic was to take a much bigger look at what is happening. And, when you think about the Spanish flu, other illnesses, other pandemics that have happened at other points in time in history, we forget about these. We think our suffering is unique, but actually almost every generation or civilization has had something, and this is just ours. And everybody gets through it in some way or another, whether you do it elegantly or not, laying on your floor, eating cheese, but we all get through it somehow, and we will too. So I think it's just sort of putting things into perspective. So actually reading a little bit on history helped me tremendously, and then focus on these small joys. So again, the newspaper, great socks, perfume, just little things to add variety in the day, because our pandemic days are just all morphing into one big soup, and we need to demarcate that in some way. All right, thank you so much. So I've just sort of been quickly checking questions, and there's one in particular that I think is interesting, and it's just this idea of, all right, so where do people actually go if they need help? So I'm just mindful of our time, but really focusing on perhaps our UAE audience or Dubai audience. If people need help, if they want to reach out to a psychologist, social worker, counselor, whoever, where do people go for something that's more or less affordable? Do insurance companies cover this kind of care? And what are some options for perhaps people who have a harder time accessing some of that mental health care? Anyone? Dr. Melanie, perhaps. I know you're in a clinic now, so perhaps you're the best positioned at the moment.
Yes, people, there are a lot of psychologists here, and which is, it's an amazing thing, because I think 10, 15 years ago, there were only a handful of us, and now there's a whole lot of people. And I think it's actually about looking online to sort of choose who might be a best fit for you, as well as perhaps if things are important to you, like sort of speaking your language or being from your country, things like that. So there is actually online, there's a lot available. And I do know it's obviously very expensive, and not everybody's insurance policies will cover psychological care, which is unfortunate. And that's something that we're still working on, as a system, to get psychology more sort of recognised, the value of having mental health help as such. But there are, I believe, a couple of the clinical organisations here who have low-cost options for people who maybe, they may give it on a sort of a sliding scale and that, and maybe I could provide that information afterwards. I'm sort of thinking of a few things off the top of my head, but they do exist. It's keeping on trying, and of course people can always ask me directly if they want to as well.
Perfect. Dr. Sonakshi, any thoughts on this question?
Yes, so actually just a very quick thing from our end, at Amity University, we have a counseling and wellness center, which has a DHO licensed counselor as well. So if there is anybody who's a university student, so in the age categories of, let's say somewhere between 18 to 25, and maybe more as well, we often, see counseling clients without charge, outside of Amity as well, but specifically a student-based population, not generically, any young adults and not adults or midlife crisis. These are not situations that we deal with. Yeah. But yes, if there is a student who needs and cannot afford, therapy, and then we definitely at Amity, they can walk into the Counseling and Wellness Center and meet the our DHA licensed counselor. So that's just something that we do as an initiative, as a social initiative to our university setup.
Thank you so much. I didn't know that existed, so I've learned something, and that's a really good resource because often young people are the ones who can afford it the least and who are often struggling the most silently. So I'm glad to hear this. All right. Thank you again so much to both of our guests. Dr. Melanie, it's a pleasure having you here and seeing you. Dr. Sonakshi as well. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we thank all of our audience members, and we wish you a thriving next couple of weeks and months. And thank you again. Have a great day. Thank you, everyone.
Lovely talking to you, ladies. Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.